Forgetting information from short-term memory. Forgetting. In previous video, we have learned that it is the loss of information from the mind. It is a tricky thing to study. But psychologists have determined that this process occurs differently between the short-term and the long-term memory. In this video, we will see how forgetting of information happens in short-term memory. Before going to the details, please remember to subscribe this channel. Do watch other videos in this channel. Share it with students and those who love learning psychology. Thank you. There are two main theories to explain forgetting in short-term memory. The first is the trace decay theory and the second is the displacement theory. Trace decay theory. Edward Thorndike came up with this theory of trace decay in 1914. This theory is based on the early studies conducted by Hermann Ebbinghaus on early memory. The decay theory is a psychological explanation for forgetting that suggests that memories fade and become less accessible over time if they are not used or reinforced. Trace decay theory. It is a specific version of the decay theory of forgetting. It suggests that memories leave a trace or imprint on the brain. And if the memory is not rehearsed or used, this trace gradually fades away over time. This theory relies on the assumption that short-term memories are inherently prone to being forgotten. That is how they work. They stick in your mind for a minute. Then they are either forgotten or transferred to long-term memory. So, the short-term memory begin to fade from the moment they are formed until all the traces of that memory have completely disappeared or decayed. In this theory, memory is not impacted by the events that occur between learning information and forgetting. It is simply a matter of time. For example, consider that you need to call a friend to arrange a program or a meeting or something like that. And he gave you his phone number. If you don't repeat the phone number or write it down, the memory trace of the phone number will begin to decay over time. As the time passes, the connections in your brain responsible for storing the phone number will gradually weaken and it will be harder to retrieve the information. If you try to recall the phone number after several hours or days have passed, you may find that you have forgotten some or all of the digits in that phone number. This could be due to the trace of the memory decaying over the time. Next is displacement theory. The second theory that psychologists use to explain the short-term memory forgetting is the displacement theory. This describes how forgetting works in short-term memory. The short-term memory has limited capacity and it can hold a small amount of information. We have learned that up to about 7 items at one time. Once the memory is full, new information will replace the old one. The short-term memory is naturally limited in its capacity. Therefore, the old information is displaced or pushed out to make room for new information. The displacement theory is based on the idea that memory is not just a passive storage system, But memory is an active process that involves encoding, storage, and retrieval. The theory suggests that forgetting occurs because new information can interfere with the recall of the older information. The displacement theory of forgetting, it depends on the studies conducted based on the free recall method. According to this method, that is a free recall method, the participants listen to many words, following which they are asked to recall them. Studies have shown that most of them can recall the first and the last words. Consider an example. You are going to a grocery store. Your mom tells you that you need to buy some milk, eggs, cheese, flour, and sugar. You try to memorize the whole list, but a lot of it goes away while you are going to the store. That is, on the way, you may forget items in the list that is given by your mom. When you arrive at the grocery store, maybe you can remember is just milk and sugar. So that is displacement theory. Advantages and limitations of trace decay theory. First, advantages. It provides simple explanation. The theory proposes that forgetting occurs due to the weakening of neural connections over time, which is a simple and intuitive explanation for why memory fade away. Second advantage is experimental support. There is some empirical evidence that support the trace decay theory, particularly for short-term memories. For example, studies have shown that memories are more likely to be forgotten if they are not rehearsed or used over time, which is consistent with the idea of trace decay. Third is practical applications. The trace decay theory can be applied to real-life situations where people need to remember information for a limited time, such as phone number or directions. By understanding how memories decay over time, people can use mnemonic strategies or repetition to improve the memory retention. Then, limitations of the trace decay theory. First one, limited application. The trace decay theory is most applicable to short-term memory and may not explain forgetting in long-term memory. Then, lack of empirical evidence. While there is some experimental support for the trace decay theory, there is also evidence that suggests that other factors such as the interference and retrieval failure can also contribute to the forgetting. Then oversimplification. The theory proposes that forgetting occurs simply due to the passage of time and the weakening of neural connections. But memory is a complex and dynamic process that involves many factors, including the attention, motivation, and emotional arousal. Then, the advantages and limitations of the displacement theory. First, we can see the advantages. It provides a possible or reasonable explanation. The displacement theory offers a reasonable explanation for why people forget information when they are presented with new information. It explains how memory capacity is limited and how the new information can push out or displace the older information. It is supported by research. There is some empirical evidence that supports the displacement theory, particularly in situations where people need to remember a large amount of information quickly. Studies have shown that people are more likely to forget earlier information when they are presented with new information, which is consistent with the idea of displacement. Then it is useful in educational settings. It can be applied to educational settings where students need to remember a large amount of information quickly. By understanding how displacement works, educators can design learning activities that helps the students remember information more effectively, such as spaced learning or interleaved practice. Now let's see the limitations of the displacement theory. First one, conflicting evidence. While some studies support the idea of displacement, other studies have found no evidence for it or have found that interference is a more important factor in forgetting. Then, overemphasis on memory capacity. Displacement theory focuses on the idea that memory has limited capacity, but it may overlook other factors that can affect the memory, such as the quality of encoding or the level of processing. Then, difficulty in application. This theory may be difficult to apply in real-life situations where memory load is high, such as in emergency situations or high-pressure tasks where people may not have the luxury of the time to encode information thoroughly. What we have learned in this video. Let's have a quick recap. We have learned how forgetting of information occurs in short-term memory, and it is explained through the trace decay theory and the displacement theory. The trace decay theory focuses on time being an essence during retrieval, and the displacement theory, it displaces the old information with the newer one. Why? Because our short-term memory has a limited capacity to retain the information. The trace decay and the displacement theory, it offer useful framework for understanding how and why forgetting occurs. And we have learned the advantages and the limitations of these two theories. Hope you liked this video. Please share and subscribe. Thank you and keep smiling.